There is a persistent myth about originality, that it belongs only to a gifted few who are born different, who fearlessly break away from tradition and blaze their own trails. But in reality, originality is far more ordinary and far more achievable than we imagine. It is not about being first, nor is it about taking wild leaps into the unknown. Originality often comes from people who question the rules that others take for granted, who dare to pause for a moment and ask, "Why are we doing this?" Originality, in other words, is not a rare gift, but a deliberate choice. And this book seeks to show how that choice can be cultivated, encouraged, and sustained, whether you are an entrepreneur, an employee, a parent, or simply someone who wants to live with more creativity and courage. Chapter 1. Creative Destruction. To understand originality, it is helpful to see how it begins, with the willingness to destroy old assumptions. This does not mean tearing down everything recklessly, but rather challenging the norms that most people accept without question. The very act of questioning creates space for new ideas to emerge. Take the example of Martin Luther King Jr. His famous "I Have a Dream" speech is remembered as a defining moment in American history. Yet what is often overlooked is how he arrived at that powerful message. Early drafts of his speech were much more conventional, filled with expected political phrases. On the day of the speech, in front of thousands of people at the Lincoln Memorial, King began speaking as planned. But then, in a moment of daring spontaneity, gospel singer Mahalia Jackson called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." King abandoned his prepared script and began improvising. The words, "I have a dream," had appeared in some of his earlier sermons, but never before had they been delivered in this way, at this scale. By departing from convention at that moment, he transformed a standard speech into one of the greatest acts of original oratory in history. This story illustrates a key insight. Originality is not always about invention from scratch. Often it comes from reassembling familiar pieces in unfamiliar ways. King did not invent the dream metaphor that day, but he dared to elevate it, to give it a new context, and in doing so, he created something timeless. Yet the path of originality is never smooth. Those who dare to challenge the status quo are often seen as reckless, disruptive, or naive. Consider Galileo, who defended the radical idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. His original thinking brought him into direct conflict with the powerful religious authorities of his time, leading to persecution and house arrest. What kept Galileo's ideas alive was not just his brilliance, but the persistence to continue arguing for truth, even when it came at immense personal cost. In modern settings, this dynamic plays out in subtler ways. Employees and organizations hesitate to voice their unconventional ideas for fear of being dismissed or punished. But those who succeed in pushing their ideas forward understand that creative destruction does not mean chaos. It means carefully dismantling what no longer works to make space for what might. Chapter 2. Blind Inventors and One-Eyed Investors. If Chapter 1 opened the door to originality, Chapter 2 steps inside the messy, uncertain room where new ideas are born and tested. Adam Grant begins by tackling a myth many of us unconsciously carry: the belief that successful innovators are gamblers who leap fearlessly into the unknown, staking everything on their big idea. But Grant shows us a more nuanced, almost counterintuitive truth. Originals are not reckless gamblers, but careful experimenters who hedge their bets. To illustrate this, Grant introduces the story of the founders of Warby Parker, the eyewear company that upended the traditional glasses market. The common lore is that their breakthrough came from taking a giant risk, betting against the giants like Luxottica. But in reality, the Warby Parker founders were strikingly cautious. They delayed launching their idea, tested it slowly, and even applied for backup jobs in case it failed. They didn't throw themselves into the abyss. They built a safety net first. This balance between vision and caution is what allowed their originality to survive. The heart of Grant's argument in this chapter is that originals often succeed not because they go all in, but because they maintain the freedom to explore. He points to studies showing that entrepreneurs who keep their day jobs while working on side projects are significantly less likely to fail than those who quit everything to pursue a startup full-time. Far from being a weakness, this caution is a hidden strength. It allows ideas to grow without the crushing pressure of immediate success. This insight flips the cultural narrative on its head. The bravest originals are not those who burn their ships, but those who keep a lifeboat at the ready. Another thread in this chapter is about how investors and supporters respond to originality. Grant recounts the story of the Segway, once hyped as a revolutionary invention that would reshape cities. Investors, dazzled by hype, poured money into it, only to watch it collapse into irrelevance. The lesson here is not just about bad judgment, but about the limits of our vision. Most people, even so-called experts, are remarkably bad at predicting which new ideas will succeed. Grant calls attention to the role of one-eyed investors, people who can't see clearly whether an idea is brilliant or foolish. They tend to misjudge, either dismissing genuinely original concepts or overestimating weak ones. So who, then, are the best judges of creative success? Surprisingly, Grant finds that fellow creators and peers are often far more accurate than managers, executives, or investors. When people are immersed in the same creative domain, they're better able to spot which ideas have real potential. This is because they recognize not only the novelty of the idea, but also whether it can be applied realistically. In contrast, outsiders often fall for flashiness, or worse, cling to familiarity. Chapter 3: Speaking Truth to Power. One of the great paradoxes of originality is that it cannot thrive in silence. An idea, however brilliant, cannot shift the world if it remains locked in someone's mind. Yet the moment we speak it aloud, we face risk. What if others mock it, reject it, or worse, use it against us? In this chapter, Adam Grant explores the art of voicing unconventional ideas, showing that the difference between an idea that fades away and one that gains traction often depends not on its merit alone, but on how and when it is presented. Grant opens with the story of Rufus Griscom, a writer and entrepreneur who launched Babbel, a parenting website in the late 2000s. When Griscom sought investors, he did something shockingly counterintuitive. Instead of hiding his company's flaws, he openly listed the reasons not to invest. This disarming honesty caught investors off guard, and rather than pushing them away, it built trust. By revealing the weaknesses, Griscom made his audience feel that the strengths must be even more credible. Later, Disney would purchase Babbel for $40 million. The lesson is striking. Sometimes admitting the cracks in an idea makes it more persuasive than pretending it's bulletproof. This honesty ties into one of the core insights of the chapter. Originals win influence not by denying the risks, but by embracing them. People are naturally skeptical of ideas that break the mold. If you acknowledge their doubts before they voice them, you lower their defenses and make them more open to hearing the potential upside. It's a strategy that diffuses resistance, much like a skilled debater who first concedes the opposing side's best argument before dismantling it. Grant then shifts to the high-stakes world of corporate whistleblowers. Speaking truth to power is rarely safe, and history is littered with stories of employees punished for raising uncomfortable questions. Yet the research Grant highlights shows that employees are more successful in voicing dissent when they frame their arguments in ways that appeal to their audience's values. For example, when junior staff in a hospital pointed out dangerous procedural mistakes, their complaints often fell on deaf ears if phrased as criticisms. But when they reframed the same concerns as ways to improve patient safety, a shared value with doctors, they were far more likely to be taken seriously. The principle is simple. Originality isn't only about what you say, but also about how you align it with the values and language of those you are trying to influence. The chapter also explores the psychology of group dynamics. Often, when someone introduces an idea that challenges the status quo, it sparks what social scientists call identity threat. Leaders or groups feel their authority or competence is under attack. Originals who succeed in these moments are those who find ways to cushion the threat. They may position their idea as a modest addition rather than a wholesale replacement, or they might present it as building upon the strengths of the existing system rather than tearing it down. In short, they avoid making others feel defensive, which keeps the conversation open. But there is also a caution here. Grant warns against over-tempering originality to the point where it becomes diluted and loses its transformative spark. Playing it safe may keep you in the conversation, but it rarely changes the outcome. The balance is delicate, too radical, and people resist, too timid, and no one listens. The sweet spot lies in presenting originality in a way that feels both bold and achievable. Chapter 4. Fools Rush In. Adam Grant opens this chapter with a paradox that often surprises people. Many of the most original thinkers, leaders, and entrepreneurs are not reckless risk-takers, as we often imagine, but deliberate and cautious. The myth of the bold visionary who leaps without looking gets challenged here. Instead, Grant argues that successful originals manage their risks like balanced investors. They may be daring in one domain, but extremely conservative in another, balancing their portfolios of risk so that a failure in one area does not destroy them completely. One of the most striking examples comes from the world of entrepreneurship. People often think of entrepreneurs as all-in gamblers who bet everything on a single idea. But studies show that entrepreneurs who keep their day jobs while building their ventures on the side are actually more likely to succeed. Grant points to cases like Steve Wozniak, who co-founded Apple while keeping his secure job at Hewlett-Packard. Far from being cowardly, this balance allowed him to take creative leaps with less fear of total ruin. The all-or-nothing mentality, Grant explains, is more Hollywood than reality. Grant deepens this point with research that demonstrates how originals hedge their bets. They rarely put all their energy into a single, untested innovation. Instead, they diversify, experiment, and test in smaller, safer ways before scaling up. This risk-calibrating behavior shows up not just in business, but in politics, art, and even science. Originals tend to play it safe in parts of their lives so that they have the psychological and financial stability to pursue boldness in others. Another dimension Grant explores is timing. Jumping too fast into a new idea can be just as disastrous as moving too slow. Being first to market is not always an advantage. In fact, first movers often stumble because they take on the highest risks, educating the market, building infrastructure, and making mistakes that followers can learn from. Instead, it is often the second movers, or improvers, who capture the biggest success, refining what others have pioneered. Grant cites examples from tech and business to show how entering at the right moment, neither too early nor too late, is a crucial skill for originals. Chapter 5. Goldilocks and the Trojan Horse. Grant begins this chapter with the tension every original thinker faces. How much novelty is too much? Radical ideas, if presented too abruptly, risk rejection. Too much familiarity, however, stifles innovation. The key lies in what he calls the Goldilocks zone, a balance of the strange and the familiar. One of his strongest examples is the Seinfeld story. At first, NBC executives nearly killed the show because it was too weird, lacking any obvious plot or moral. But what saved it was how it wrapped its strangeness inside ordinary, relatable characters and everyday experiences. By disguising boldness in familiarity, Seinfeld managed to become one of the most original cultural products of its time. Grant also highlights the Trojan horse method, where disruptive ideas are smuggled into the mainstream through safe packaging. The lesson is clear. Originality isn't about shock value. It's about pacing novelty in a way that allows others to digest it. Chapter 6. Rebel with a Cause. Here, Grant shifts to the importance of values in driving originality. He shows how rebels succeed not just by being contrarians, but by anchoring their defiance in deeply held principles. When we think of rebels, we imagine rule breakers who live without boundaries. Yet what Adam Grant uncovers is that the most enduring rebels are not just tearing down, they are building something in its place. What truly sustains originality is not the joy of disruption for its own sake, but anchoring rebellion in a deeper sense of purpose. This is why so many revolutionary movements and bold companies succeed when they have a cause greater than personal ambition. Take the story of Carmen Medina, who challenged rigid thinking at the CIA. Her push for more open information sharing faced resistance, but her credibility and sense of mission eventually changed how the agency handled intelligence. Similarly, Grant points to Martin Luther King Jr., whose success lay not in anger, but in framing his rebellion around shared values of justice and equality. The chapter suggests that when original thinkers appeal to common principles, their defiance ceases to look threatening and instead appears necessary. Being a rebel without grounding can lead to chaos, but being a rebel with a cause makes change possible. Chapter 7. Rethinking groupthink. Groupthink has long been seen as the enemy of originality, the silent force that makes people nod along to bad ideas simply because everyone else does. Grant reframes this idea by showing that it isn't groups themselves that kill creativity, but the wrong kinds of groups. Homogeneous groups, where everyone looks, thinks, and acts alike, inevitably narrow the range of thought. But diverse groups, when managed with respect, become engines of innovation. The best example is Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund run by Ray Dalio, where employees are expected, even required, to challenge leaders openly. This radical transparency can be uncomfortable, but it prevents blind spots and nurtures independent thought. Grant also emphasizes the value of outsiders, people who bring a fresh perspective precisely because they don't fit the mold. Diversity of thought is not a buzzword here. It's the safeguard against intellectual stagnation. Chapter 8. Rocking the Boat and Keeping It Steady. The final chapter explores one of the paradoxes of originality. The best originals are rarely reckless. They take risks, but they balance them with stability in other parts of their lives. Grant reminds us that originality is not a one-time act, but an ongoing practice. He explores the paradox of successful changemakers. They are both radical and cautious, disruptive yet grounded. The civil rights leaders, for example, balanced fiery demands for justice with careful coalition building. In business, innovators often hedge their risks, like entrepreneurs who keep their day jobs while experimenting with new ventures. The lasting lesson is that rocking the boat doesn't mean sinking it. Originals endure not by rejecting stability, but by weaving their radicalism into structures that allow them to last. Grant also emphasizes the art of persistence. Many people assume that original ideas arrive like lightning, fully formed and undeniable. Yet in truth, the path is messy. Even great innovators like Thomas Edison, who famously produced thousands of failed prototypes, were able to succeed because they endured frustration longer than others. Originals, in the end, are not fearless geniuses, but ordinary people who develop extraordinary patience for their vision. The book closes with an empowering thought. Originality is not reserved for a rare breed. It belongs to those who question, who challenge, and who refuse to accept that things must remain as they are. By balancing rebellion with purpose, dissent with openness, and risk with steadiness, any of us can learn to become originals in our own way. Conclusion. As Adam Grant closes Originals, he reminds us that the act of standing apart from convention is less about heroic leaps into the unknown and more about a continuous negotiation between fear, doubt, and courage. Originality is not reserved for the gifted few, nor does it require reckless risk-taking. It thrives instead in the ordinary moments when people choose to speak up rather than stay silent, to test an idea rather than suppress it, to nurture curiosity rather than conform to certainty. What distinguishes originals from imitators is not a lack of anxiety or hesitation, but a decision to act in spite of them. Each of us has the power to shape the future, not by waiting for inspiration, but by daring to voice what others hesitate to say. Every hesitation to speak up is a chance lost, and every small act of defiance is a step toward change. As Grant makes clear, the true tragedy is not in failing to be original, it is in never trying. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed this summary and found it valuable, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth book breakdowns. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll see you in the next video.